Now sometimes I don't want to use a two-node camera because I don't need these extra controls, but animating a one-node camera with the camera tools can sometimes be a little bit frustrating, constantly switching back to those tools. But there's a really easy rig that you can set up for a one-node camera to be able to control it with a null and basically move it around and animate it just like any other layer. So I'm going to change my camera back to a one-node camera really quick so I can show you how this setup works. So I'll do that, and for now I'm just going to disable my depth of field. I don't need to see that, so I'm going to turn that off. The focus distance is still linked to that null, and I don't want that anymore, so I'm going to delete that and then double tap E on the camera to bring that up and just clear this out. So my focus distance is no longer linked. I don't have to worry about that anymore. And finally, I just want to reset my transform properties just so the camera is right where it would be if I had just created it. Now I'm going to add a new null object, and this is going to be our camera controller. So go to Layer, New, Null Object, and I'm going to rename this camera controller and make sure that it's 3D. Now all I need to do is parent my camera to the null object. And now the null object is controlling the position and all of the transform properties of this camera. So if I click and drag on this yellow square that I have in the middle of my screen, you see that it's going to be moving my camera around. If I move the Z axis, it's going to move it in and out. And the null itself looks like it's not moving at all because the camera is parented to it. So our perspective in this active camera view is through that camera's eyes. And the camera relative to this null object is always the same. So it's basically just giving us this little camera control right in the middle of our comp. Whatever we do with it is going to modify the world around the camera and what the camera is seeing. If I switch my rotation tool by pressing W, I can rotate the camera around that point. And if I click and drag in the middle, I can just freely adjust the rotation overall. This way I don't have to switch between these camera controls to modify the camera. I can just move it around, go in and out, and always have this central controller for my camera right in the middle of the screen. Another really great thing about this is that it allows me to animate the position of the camera independently of the controller, which we can use to our advantage to create some fake camera shake if we want to add in a little bit more organic movement, and that's something that I'll cover in a later video. But it's that easy to make a really simple to use camera rig inside of After Effects. Just make sure that your camera is where it would be when you first create it without any transform controls being modified, because your null object is going to be right in the center of your scene or the world of this comp, and this comp is 1280 by 720, so that would be 640 by 320 by 0, I believe, and then the orientation would be zeroed out. And because that's where it's creating the null, you want to make sure that your camera is also wherever its origin would be, so that when you parent the camera to that null, it's all nice and lined up. Now, I actually noticed that my point of interest is still here. If I twirl this down and open up my transform controls, there it is. So I don't know what I missed there, but let's go back into the camera settings, change that to one node, click OK. And now I don't need to worry about that extra property. So there we go. I must have just forgotten to switch that before I made up this rig, but that's all you need to do to create a very simple on-screen rig for controlling a one-node camera.